called Upgrading Legacy Java EE App Style. I just want to add to what he said about me. The podcast is actually, we changed the name. It's called the Stacked Podcast, Stack D. So, and we talk about front end and back end development and also Java. And we have a lot of guests on, industry luminaries on. So if you like podcasts, check it out. And I've been involved in sort of the Java EE or enterprise Java space for a long time. But obviously I still work with Spring and microservices and stuff depending on what I'm working on. So for those of you in the audience, how many of you guys have worked on worked with legacy apps before? Okay. How many, is that what you're doing currently, or you're in a phase of migration? Okay. Okay. And do you guys work, like, are you migrating to, like, what are you migrating to? I guess that's the question.
In monolithic applications, we are migrating into more microservices.
Okay. 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 And yeah, I think I'll ask you more questions along the way then. Okay. All right. And actually, what stack is it currently? The monolith. What stack is it?
It's mainly Java, JS we submit.
Okay.
And struts.
Oh, struts. Wow. Okay. And is it Tomcat and struts, or is it something else in struts? Is it Tomcat? Tomcat. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Yes. So I think we'll do more back and forth because I'm also curious about your project. So, all right, great. So I'll tell you my story. So, and I do work with a lot of legacy projects because I'm known for Java server faces, which is a legacy technology. It's still actually in development. It's not deprecated. And actually, it still works quite fine. But you know, a lot of times people need an expert with that. They bring me in. So one of my clients wanted us to upgrade a legacy app to work with a recently supported version of WebSphere. This is not Open Liberty, which is the hip new version of rewrite of WebSphere. This is WebSphere Classic. Basically, their deal was they have migrated from this application for the most part for several lines of businesses, but not a couple lines of business, which are only on the old application. Okay. And of course, like most clients, if they don't want to be on a version that's not supported anymore, because if there's any issues, they get in trouble, right? And so that was sort of the main idea, is like they migrated stuff to a new platform, and they basically, it's an insurance company. So they had built the application, and I helped them build it a long time ago, as a, you know, JSF, JSP application and everything. And they had supported all the lines of business that did everything they needed. But over time, they realized there was a third-party platform called Guidewire, which is an insurance platform. So it's more of like off-the-shelf software that they can then customize for everything. So it'll save them time down the road. And it's a quasi-managed service sort of thing. And actually, and what's interesting about their technology is the front end was Angular, and then they changed it to React. But the back end actually runs on the JVM using a language called Gosu, G-O-S-U. Has anyone ever heard of this? Yeah, neither had I. So it's their own JVM language, and then it actually uses Jersey, but they don't use like normal filters and stuff. They have their own APIs for everything. So it's like total vendor lock-in, but it's actually running on the JVM. So anyways, they moved most of the stuff to this new platform, but they have part of their stuff using the old application. So, and I had the pleasure of working, actually, I still work with him now. Bala C, he's known for a lot of prime spaces, a lot of JSF enterprise Java stuff as well. They were like, okay, we want you to move it to something that's actually supported, right? Because this is some old application, no one's touched it in a while. It's not supported by anything. We want to integrate with the new framework that I just told you about. That new application was actually, they were in the process of moving it from on-prem to cloud. So basically, the new app we got to integrate with was going to be running in the cloud, sort of as a managed service sort of thing. But the app we were upgrading was going to remain on-prem. So it's sort of an interesting scenario. But basically, they're like, well, we basically want you to get this up to speed so that we can have it supported. But we'll probably get rid of the whole thing in 2 or 3 years anyways. So, if we want to make it beautiful, we just have to make it work, and that was basically our mandate. The thing they didn't really mention until we got into the project is that they want also that the legacy app was actually doing all the security, not just for the legacy stuff, but also for the new stuff. And then we had to replace that with Okta. So we started the project and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, Okta. And I'm like, well, I know Okta, but I didn't know it was involved in this project. So that was a fun wrinkle. So now it's been about 14 years ago the first version was released, and I actually spearheaded the project and helped them get started. So it's kind of neat to like build something, then come back like over a decade later and like work on it again. But by the time we got to it this time, it was over 550,000 lines of Java code, over 550 web pages, but only half of them were in use because the other ones have been migrated to the new platform. And we had to do this analysis because we're like, okay, well, we don't know what we're dealing with. These are like, how many pages are there? Like, what needs to be done? We thought at the time that since these are all JSPs and stuff, we thought we'd have to migrate them to Facelets, which is like the replacement for JSP for JSF pages. We weren't really sure what we needed to do. And then we found there's actually 4 different apps sharing core business logic and services. And we thought there was like one app, right? So they had a back office internal app, 2 public-facing web apps, and then we found out they had all these SOAP services, which we didn't know existed either. So all this is all running on WebSphere and everything. So, I don't think, let's see, had I done? Yes, I had done some SOAP on another project because we had to integrate with government stuff, so we had to do SOAP for that. But, I was like, oh, I guess I need to find something so I can test out SOAP endpoints and figure out how all this stuff works. So that was a lot of fun. So the first thing though was like, okay, well, we know they want to move to a support version of WebSphere, okay? And I was like, well, it'd be cool if we could just move them off WebSphere into something, on Open Liberty or something. That was kind of what I was thinking. So this was before, so this is you'll see this metaphor throughout my slides here, the old house, okay? WebSphere Application Server 7, which is very old. So they had that. And also, this is all clustered and everything too. So they had a couple different instances. And have either of you worked with WebSphere before or any of these older application servers? So what's interesting about them is that we all talk about Kubernetes and all that kind of stuff. It's like back then, like the app servers did all that stuff. So you could manage the entire cluster through the app server admin console. So there's a lot of that we had to do. And so it's like, it's funny because like people are like, oh, those big bloated app servers. It's like, well, yeah, we didn't have Kubernetes and all this other stuff to manage everything. The app servers managed the entire cluster. You could shut different nodes down and everything. It actually worked pretty well. But anyway, so I wanted to, oh, this part is messed up. Whoops. What I wanted to do was upgrade to Open Liberty, like I said, right? But we had to upgrade to WebSphere Application Server 9, which at that point in time was the most recent version. And we had to do that. Whoops. No, it's not. Yeah, my slides are messed up here. All right, so here's the kicker, right? We evaluated Liberty and other options, but we needed to support JAX RPC. Anyone heard of JAX RPC before? So JAX RPC is an old library, which is used for SOAP. Okay, so all the SOAP endpoints use JAX RPC, and I was like, I've worked with a lot of the stuff I had not worked with JAX RPC before. And it's not deprecated, it's not even supported in any newer app server. So we had to stick with WebSphere 9. So that's what we ended up doing. All right, so, and then, we wanted to look at the different APIs involved, right? So what are we actually working with? And so we had IBM JDK 6 and Java EE5, JSP 2.1, JAX RPC, so all these old APIs we were using, like, man, okay. And these are the other APIs that we're using. So they had an old JSF component library called NetAdvantage for JSF. Anyone heard of this? Didn't think so. So that was last version came out in 2009. They kind of killed the product during the financial crash of that period. So, and they had this thing called the IBM Java Server Widgets library, and they had Apache MyFaces Tomahawk. So they had all these things. And what was interesting is that some of these things only shipped with a rational application developer. Now, I'd been in this industry for a long time and working with Java Server Faces. I really didn't even know about this library. And I was like, okay, what is this thing? So what we ended up with was a modest upgrade, because we couldn't really go any further, get to a newer version than what we had with that version of WebSphere. So at the time, that version of WebSphere supported Java 8, was the latest version it supported. So that's what we had to do. And this little red arrow means there is no real upgrade path, right? So it's like, okay, we're using JAX RPC, we're just going to keep it the way it is and make sure it still works. And that was really, at the end of the day, that was the most important thing, right? Making sure everything still works. But we were able to upgrade to Java E7, which is still pretty old, but newer versions of different APIs. And we kind of had to stick with this other stuff, the Infragistics libraries and everything. And we're like, okay, we can't really upgrade these. What are we going to do with them, right? So it turned out that, and this is one of the key things I want to emphasize, is that depending on what your goal is, if your goal is just to make it work, which is kind of what our goal was, we didn't have to rewrite as much stuff as we thought we would. Okay, and this is largely because Java is pretty backwards compatible, right? And so is Java EE or Jakarta EE, right? So we thought we would have to rip out all these old components, which are really old and they're not supported anymore. But we found out we could actually get them working with some minimal changes. So we didn't have to get rid of those components. And we were able to replace the IBM components with vanilla HTML and stuff. They weren't really a big deal to get rid of. So that turned out to be not a big deal, which is nice. And because of this, we didn't have to get rid of the JSP. Now, if I were going through a true modernization, yes, I would get rid of JSP. But in our scenario, that wasn't a requirement, because we just had to make sure it worked. But what was interesting were a few things. So the web services were kind of a pain to work with. They were very good at obfuscating errors. And JAX RPC does a lot of code generation. So we had to sort of understand what was being generated and what wasn't and how all that worked together. So that was a lot of fun. Also, this app in general has poor error handling, which is a pet peeve of mine and very common these days. So remember this when you're writing code, and you think, oh, I'll just throw an exception, or I won't really think about what it means, or I'm going to log it 20 times, that down the road, someone's going to have to pay for it. So the error handling was really made things hard to debug, right? Okay, so that was sort of the basic coding stuff. The actual upgrades for the code wasn't that bad. It was more about making sure we had the right platform and, doing initial analysis to determine how many pages there were and which ones we had to upgrade and all that kind of stuff. And also, we kind of had to go through page by page and make sure they all still worked. But fortunately, there weren't not a ton of changes that were required. But then there was that whole security thing, right? We were like, oh yeah, by the way, this app does security for the new stuff and the old stuff, and we want you to make it basically integrate this with Okta, okay? And what they were doing for the new stuff is they were just going directly through Okta, right? So, and they were actually migrating the users from the old database, their on-prem database to Okta. So really all we had to worry about was integrating this application with Okta. We didn't have to integrate the new stuff with Okta. That was another team. Although we did have a lot to do with setting up Okta in general, but that's a different story. Are you guys familiar with Okta? I'm just assuming everybody is. So Okta is just an identity provider. So like, so many. Like Auth0, which they own, is one. But they do SSO, right? So you can have X number of applications, they all sign into Okta, and then you can get access to them all. So they were using Okta not only for external facing, but also for internal stuff as well. Okay. You know, and you get a JWT, you get a JSON web token, and you have to work with all that kind of stuff. So for the web services, oh yeah, this is actually an interesting thing. So actually, what they didn't tell us is that these web services, these SOAP services that we didn't know existed, not only well, the reason they exist is so that the new code can call the old code, right? So the new framework would make SOAP calls to the legacy side, right? And we're like, okay, but you do realize that now you're moving the new code to be in the cloud, and we're still on-prem. So you're going to have to like deal with security now. We didn't have to deal with that before. So we had to actually figure out how to do authentication on top of the SOAP stuff separately from everything else, and integrate that with Okta. So that was fun. We had to do machine-to-machine OAuth 2, and we had to write a custom servlet filter for the SOAP stuff. It returned a generic SOAP, returned a SOAP error envelope back. And for those of you who don't know, SOAP is an XML-based protocol. So we had to do all that. So that was an interesting detour, was getting a handle on, you know, the security layer for the SOAP side. And then they had the public JSF apps, right, which were sort of the main thing, okay? And they supported this one line of business, or actually a couple lines of business. Okay, so they were using this obscure product called IBM Web Seal, an IBM Security Access Manager, ISAM, and a custom database authorization as well. So we had to basically rip that out, integrate with Okta. And we were able to do that with an OAuth 2 authorization code grant type. We had to write a custom servlet filter and a custom servlet to do all this. And Okta does, as I said before, auth for both apps, right? So we did ensure that, you know, once you log into the new stuff, and then you access a legacy page, that you're still logged into Okta during that process. So the internal JSF app fortunately had no security changes because it was only hit by internal people. So that was a good one. That was nice. And in terms of pain points, the Okta docs are not so great. It's one of those products that has a lot of documentation, but then when you read through it, you're like, I still don't think that explains what I wanted to know. So it's one of those. And one of the issues we have is that most of the Java examples are for Spring Boot, which is great for you guys if you're using Spring Boot. It wasn't so great for us because we weren't. Now, fortunately, it's pretty easy to translate, but you know, it was still kind of annoying. So. Okay, so testing is a big thing, especially for any legacy project, right? And we know this organization was not one that was known for writing lots of tests, and they're still not. I generally am big on test. I'm not that great at TDD. I try it, but at least I try to make sure there's good test coverage. So we wanted to at least, you know, we knew we were not going to write heavy regression testing, and they did not have automated tests for the UI, but they did have a lot of manual testing for the UI. So we figured we'll just do the best we can. And what we tried to do was, first of all, make sure the existing unit tests work. This is one of those organizations where they had unit tests, And, so some of them were failing and they're like, whatever, try to make sure that everything that was there was actually would run. Fortunately, we had the manual QA to help make sure that it actually matched the behavior of the old app. But one of the things we did do was we said, like, if you're doing any serious refactoring or writing any new code, we actually add a test. Okay, so at least we could ensure that when we're making changes, we have some confidence that they are going to be working. Okay, so we increased the test coverage, but our goal was just to make sure that we didn't break anything, and that anything new that we wrote still worked. Okay. So documentation was another big thing. And I think this is very important for any project, especially a legacy project, right? And before, there wasn't really any documentation about this code base. And this organization still uses SharePoint, although I think we've actually convinced them to use Confluence now, which took a while. But the documentation was scattered and outdated, and it was like hard to find out anything about this app. Okay. So the first thing we did was we set up a wiki page on Confluence. We started using Markdown and READMEs, which they didn't use. Okay. So each repo has a README saying what to do, what it is, how to build it, all that kind of basic stuff. Okay. And so we could document along the way. And it actually turned out to be very useful because at this point in time, we're not developing, this project's done. And they've taken over all management of it, and they go to the wiki page to, we put instructions for how to troubleshoot issues when they come up, all the configuration for all the servers that we had, and they have, they had a cluster, so they were different servers that, were in different environments. So they had staging and development, production, etc. All that stuff is documented. And that was a big boon to them because they didn't even have that before. So that was an important thing. And I encourage you guys, even if you're migrating, you should try and do that first too, to make sure that you have a good picture of what's actually there, the prior state. So one of the other things we ran into was version control. So this organization had previously used this thing called MKS Integrity, which is one of those older commercial products. And at this point in time, they were only using it for this application. Like, they weren't really using it for the new stuff because their vendor had sort of pushed them to Git. So they were finally getting a handle on Git and stuff like that. And they're like, well, you can just use MKS Integrity. And we're like, no, we should move this to Git too. Like, I don't want to use this thing. So we had to copy all the code to Git. We actually got them to get a Bitbucket account, all that kind of stuff. We said, to hell with the history, like, there's not really much we can do about it. So we just basically copied it over, created a new repo in Git, and moved from there. And no one cared about the history anyway, so it was fine. So we realized, after we started testing stuff, that we were actually missing some code because the code they gave us wasn't the latest. So that was fun. And they actually had used Subversion for other projects. So now, they had MKS Integrity for this ancient thing. They had been using Subversion and they were starting to use Git. So so if someone gives you some code that they say is, the project you're working on, double check that there's not some other code that, is missing. So there's 3 or 4 files. There was some new feature someone had built and it just wasn't included in what they gave us. So that was fun. But probably, I'd say if I looked at this project overall, the 2 biggest pain points were not the code. This is why I think this is an interesting talk. Of course, I do. But the biggest pain points were Okta, all the security integration, because not only did we set up the security, for this legacy application, but there was also there's a couple things I didn't mention here. So there was this feature called Quick Pay they have, where you can just go and pay, which of course is great for them because you don't have to log in or anything, right? But we had to figure out how to make it work, because essentially what's happening, what needed to happen is it needed to redirect to the new application. The new application needed to have like a user who could only access this one page, right? And we had to basically create a temporary Okta user with a certain very limited permissions, okay? And then the Okta user would eventually, it would basically expire right away. So there's all this machinery that was involved in just doing that, you know, using Okta, creating a temporary user, redirecting to the new app after they entered in their information. And what's funny is what was happening is they put in their policy and stuff, right? And then we would make a web services call to the new system. And then once they got through and to the page, they would actually make a call back to the old system. It was kind of funky. Anyways, so we had to do that. And also, one of the things that we had to deal with was the fact that they had sort of a user registration thing, right? Where you could edit your user information and stuff. And that ended up still being on the legacy JSF side. So we wrote actually a couple new pages for them for all this stuff, because it was easier for us to do it there than for them to add it onto the third-party product. So there was a little bit of new stuff going on there. Oh wait, yeah. But the build was the pain. So, before, they had build and employment via simple Jenkins jobs, which is good. I like Jenkins. Has anyone used Jenkins before? Have anyone used Jenkins before? Okay, good. So yeah, they use Jenkins. They actually, the cloud stuff was using TeamCity, but they're using Jenkins on-prem. So that was nice. But what I didn't know is this sort of thing here. Everybody built the app locally with a Rational Application Developer. And there were 3 EARs. An EAR is an enterprise archive, which no one really uses anymore. But it was like one big file that could have multiple web applications and then like EJB application or something inside of it. And that's what they had. And we're like, okay, that's interesting. But this was kind of the pain point, right? Because what happened was people would test locally with RAD, and then they run through this Jenkins job to do the actual deployment and everything. And it turned out that what it did was run a whole bunch of Ant scripts, some custom Java code, Jython scripts on this random Windows box that nobody really cared about. And it also used proprietary Ant-based JAX RPC code generation tools. So what was happening was when people were building stuff locally, this would do all the code generation inside a Rational Application Developer, right? So they got stuff to work. And then when it deployed, it would run as part of the build, which is logical. But we weren't using Rational Application Developer. There was no project for us to work with. So, when we got the code, we're like, well, how do we even get it to run? Like, there was no way for a developer to get it to run unless you were using Rational Application Developer exactly how they used to use it. Okay, so it was not that great. And the other thing is the build scripts were not managed in version control or anything, so they were on that Windows box all by themselves. So when we got into it, we're like, wow, the build is actually a huge mess. Like, this is not sustainable, So we had to make a lot of changes. So we kept build and deployment pipelines in Jenkins, and we had to use this multi-branch Bitbucket plugin, which is handy for automatically building and of different branches and PRs. It's pretty handy. And we said, all right, well, let's run all the builds inside of a Docker container using Red Hat Linux. And they didn't have any Docker containers running for their builds yet, so that was fun to go through. But the most fun part was the Maven drama, right? So we basically had to create we basically Mavenized the entire project, right? Made a multi-module Maven project, and we actually had to delegate to IBM to Ant tasks to do stuff. Does anyone remember Ant? I'm talking about it as if people remember it. Okay. So it turns out Maven can actually run ant tasks, which is great to know. We're dealing with legacy stuff. And there was no way to do it without using these ant tasks. I tried to find it, but there wasn't. So those we're using for some build stuff. They do have a WebSphere Maven plugin, which we use for deployment. I had to do some weird hacks to get things to work well inside of Eclipse because the other developer uses Eclipse, even though I don't. And we also changed it to 4 WAR files. We didn't really need an EAR file, so that wasn't really a requirement anymore. So that was it took a lot of work to get all this stuff to work, especially all of the stuff with the ant tasks and everything. Also, the plugin for deployment was a lot of work because basically we deployed to the actual servers that in different environments, and we had to configure Jenkins to deploy to different environments and all that kind of fun stuff. But at the end of the day, what was nice is that we had basically a push button way to deploy to any environment from any branch. Well, default would be main, of course. But we could also even test, from a test branch that we're working with, we could deploy it to development if you wanted to, things like that. So we had a very flexible pipeline at the end of the day, which not only is good for them longer term, but was good for us just for building stuff. Okay. So there were, of course, some pain points. They did not have an internal repository, so no Artifactory or Nexus or anything like that. Have you guys worked in environments like that where there's no repository? Right? Okay, that's good. So that was a problem, and it wasn't really a situation where it made sense for us. Normally, if I'm in that environment, I say, "Hey, I'll be happy to set you up Nexus or something." In this environment, it didn't really make a lot of sense because we knew this was going away in a couple of years or a few years, and they didn't really need to share dependencies for it or anything. Now, I think they should probably do it for their other projects, but that wasn't really, our purvey. So we just created a local repo and stored it in Git. We created a local Maven repository or stored it in Git. That's good enough for you guys for now. And we also found that several jars weren't in Maven Central, which is why we had to create a local repository. Because I don't know where they got the jars, but they don't exist anywhere on the internet right now. So, and these were the ones that were hard to find. So that's why we needed our own repository. The character encoding in the source code was a pain. We had some issues there. Some of their libraries actually required the IBM JDK specifically. They would not compile in other JDKs. And integrating ant task and Maven was, of course, a pain. But that was very important for the code generation. So what was nice though is that once we got all the build stuff working, we could build it in the IDE, and then we got to generate all the code I was talking about, so we didn't have to worry about that. So that was nice. All right, so let's do takeaways, and I think we can have some questions. I'd like to see what you guys are working on. One of the takeaways I think is very key is that Java and Jakarta EE are extremely backwards compatible. And this is, of course, very intentional. But, we didn't have any issues upgrading the JDK. I know sometimes you can have issues upgrading to more recent versions, but it really was not a big deal. The fact that we were able to get all this stuff working with the ancient JAX RPC stuff and it still just worked was pretty cool. Once we figured out how it worked, that is. So that was nice. And this is sort of, I think, one of the key takeaways is that, the code may not be the only thing to worry about. There's lots of other things, right? So documentation, version control, security for us, new features that are unexpected, build, CI, CD, etc. So there could, just remember there's always extra things that people are not thinking about or don't know about. Okay. And one of the key things here is you really should try and change as little as possible. If you've got something that actually has critical business value, you don't really want to make a lot of changes to it. And this is always hard for me, right? I look at some code, it's like horrible code. That's like, over a decade old, and I want to rewrite it. Like I love refactoring code. But it's really, is there any business value to me rewriting this old code that works? Are there unit tests to guarantee that after I touch it, it'll still work? Like, if that's not the case, then you probably don't need to touch it. So the other thing, this has happened to me again recently, is that you have to have QA online. We had another project where we did all this work and we had no one doing QA, and the client couldn't give us any QA resources. I ended up doing QA. It's not the best use of my time, and I'm not that good at it. So I did all this QA, and then once they finally gave us QA resources, they found all these bugs, and they were annoyed about them. It's like, but you don't have automated tests, and you didn't do any QA. We make changes, we think it works, but we don't know your business, So you have to make sure QA is online. And also, you want to try and make things easier for those who come after you, because there's always going to be somebody else. So just try and keep that in mind. No, I think that's it. Or my screen locked up. Yep, that's it. Okay. Well, with that, we have some more time. So, do you guys have any questions before I ask you questions?
These are basically applications which were 10 to 15 years older. So about the initial stages of the career, like these type of the applications I work with, like TCS and all. But now everybody is basically moving towards microservices.
Right.
It was good, like it was like the nostalgia really coming.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's other things we ended up doing on this project, but they were tangentially related too, because we were also working on their mobile app too, so there was some integration stuff there. But so you guys are working on your upgrading a monolith, right? How big is the monolith? It's what?
Core application of the
Okay. Okay. And how big is the team that's doing the migration?
So we don't have a dedicated team. We jump by jump. If we want to work on we have to add a feature on a particular module or functionality, we pick that module and we migrate it to the new microservice. We don't actively try to change
That's a good idea. So you've got,
because we don't have time.
right,
We don't have time and resources to do that.
right. So it's an iterative process. Okay.
It's a long iterative process.
Yes, exactly. So how do you handle testing?
Same, the older one doesn't have a unit test cases.
Okay.
One has a unit test cases and your automation.
Okay. Good.
Same. We have a dedicated. Currently, we are actively migrating struts to Spring.
Right.
So it is very difficult to migrate struts from Spring. So we are just removing struts to Servlet JSP. Try to do go to the core, and then module by module we will migrate it to the Spring.
Interesting. Okay. So what are you using on the front end when you migrate it to Spring? Okay, so you're using Angular on the front end. Okay. Interesting. And this is always a big question, like, is the logic separated enough that you can, that it's easy to do this, like feature by feature? It's not?
It is very difficult. Initial was very so-called object-oriented way. Everything was tightly coupled, because since it is a Java access, you call the method. It is not a REST.
Right.
In your report, like,
So it was tightly coupled module-wise. There was some logical separation, but it was difficult to move out without changing too much.
Okay.
And the new one is domain-driven design. We have picked the domain-driven design, and we are creating
That's a good idea.
individual domains and creating a small microservice around that.
Okay.
we have challenges in that also because our application is on-prem and on cloud also.
Ah,
And
interesting.
Windows and Linux also. So it's a server application, and legacy is on Windows, deployed on Windows. So few customers, large customers, were not agreeing on migrating into Linux.
Okay. So they're deploying it on-prem, like your customers are?
Yeah.
Ah,
Our team will support that deployment.
okay.
There is that also.
Gotcha.
Creating a microservice for on-prem deployment is a pain. Right. So we are somewhat keeping this logical separation and creating a big application which runs on a single server.
I was gonna say that, like, and this is sort of my take on microservices. Like, I don't think they're necessary all the time.
Yeah,
Like,
I totally agree.
yeah, like and I've been in environments where we do that. But actually, what I do is I write right-sized services. So I'll write like mostly something which is large but can easily be split up by domain, and then when there's an obviously very different requirement, that to me makes a good microservice. But if you're doing domain-driven development, you could deploy, like you're saying, like everything for one client if you wanted to, which is nice. So interesting. Did you upgrade JDKs?
Yeah.
What did you upgrade from to?
We are currently on 11, we are upgrading on 17.
Okay. Okay.
We only upgrade to the NPs.
So you can go to 21 now.
Yeah.
You should go to
We
21.
already started for 17, so
And you should still upgrade. Trying to get
the
out.
problem is Tomcat because Tomcat moved from Java to Jakarta in 10. Tomcat 9 to 10,
Yeah.
and our application uses Java X, so we have to replace Jakarta.
We gotta do that with the new, what version of Spring Boot are you using? You need to upgrade.
Yeah, that's very difficult.
Did you
The dependencies or other external libraries.
did you
Definitely, it's a gap challenging country.
you should do it now.
There are few libraries which they have still not yet supported
So
Say it
you
again?
can work on Tomcat 10, two libraries.
One
One
example
of
is
them is Squad. So remember scheduling library.
they don't support the part.
The latest version does. Yeah.
They have a release candidate, but it's not a released version.
It's a snapshot version.
What part doesn't support Jakarta?
What writing itself?
The what library?
Squad.
Oh, Quartz. Interesting. Because we're in a project now. We're using Tomcat with. Oh, they're using Spring Boot too.
The problem is on-prem everything is deployed on a machine, single machine. The legacy application also and the new application.
Mm-hmm.
There if we have multiple Java, multiple Tomcat installed, it will become
Yeah.
I think for the implementation and support that. So legacy application uses some third-party libraries which is yet not migrated to the Jakarta or it doesn't work on Tomcat.
Gotcha.
So there are workarounds provided by Tomcat. You can runtime change Java X to Jakarta.
Mm-hmm.
But legally we are not allowed to do that. Because you are
Fascinating.
legally changing someone's else binary and
Right.
it's not a legal thing.
Yeah, because you got the
There are
whole.
lots of things in Tomcat and Java upgrades which we are missing.
Yeah. Did you go to Ivar's session on upgrading Spring apps to Spring 3? I think you already had it though, but he was covering the whole migration process with the Jakarta EE namespace.
Really.
Yeah, you should look for it. It'll be when they record it. You should look for it.
Yeah, sure.
Because he might have some insight into that, specifically with Tomcat. That's interesting. So it's the Quartz library that's the issue.
There are what is just example. DCPUs is one of them.
What was that?
Just announced their
Bouncy Castle builds like this. You heard of it?
Say it again.
Bouncy Castle.
quick library.
It's a web security provider.
Okay.
Bouncy Castle.
Oh, this Bouncy Castle. Yes. Okay.
They have just provided like, I'm not sure whether they are,
Java 17
Yeah.
for Tomcat.
yeah, Java 17. They don't have
So they
Java
released,
20
recently they released the PCs 3.0, 2.0, which support Java 17.
Okay.
Basically it works, but it is not certified, so we can't use it.
Interesting.
Their actual library, the basically version 3 is yet not certified. Like they are submitted to certification, I think, 7 months back. Yeah, like they have to
No,
submit it for
they
the.
have a certification program, authority certifies that it is PIMS compliance. So PIMS is a standard, encryption standard. Then the authority approves your Java. So they have not yet approved.
I think they're in the Malta since months, more than 9 months.
Say it again?
It's, they have given it, they submitted it to the certification around 9 months back. The authority has not yet certified.
Huh.
First they'll do it to 17, then they'll go to 21, only then we can go to the.
Okay, so you're stuck. Yeah. Okay, that's fair.
So when you have a third-party dependency, lot of third-party dependencies.
Yeah, yeah. Although 17's been out for a long time now. I mean, I guess 21 hasn't been out that long. So okay. And what other questions do I have for you? What percentage have you migrated so far?
Sorry?
What percentage of the app?
Around 20, 30.
Okay. So you've got.
We have a very big product release. You can say a functional or feature release.
Mm-hmm.
Build entirely on the new things.
Right. Right.
Around last 3 around 3 years, we haven't actively built anything new on that particular part of my project.
Right.
We are just maintaining the old.
Maintaining the old one, migrating everything else, or creating everything new in Spring Boot or whatever the latest technology is.
Right. Right. Okay, that's cool.
It's a very slow process.
Yes, and I ran into someone else that was going through the exact same sort of thing, just iteratively doing it. How do they ensure consistency between the user interfaces? Because some people don't do that too well. So curious.
Usually we go, so the older legacy is as a JSP, which is kind of very tightly coupled to the web application itself.
Right.
We have to anyway rewrite to the Angular. So we rewrite it into the new things and we deprecate. So initially there was no portal and server separation.
Right.
And backend.
Right. Right.
Now it is a separate thing. Then there is the API gateway which figures out where to go, the old legacy code or the new legacy.
Okay.
We are versioning REST. We are using REST, and REST API decides where if it is a version 1, go to legacy, or anything else, go to the microservice cluster.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. But like when someone's using the new app, I'm sorry, the old app or the new app, whichever one, and then they go to the new one.
Usually it's the same application.
Right, it's the same application, but how do you ensure it doesn't look like that? It looks like the same application.
The UI.
Yes.
So we have custom made all the components that we use. And right now we are trying to go to Angular and use the standard ones. So we are trying to fetch the ones that are most similar to the existing ones. But the existing ones are not any certificates, not certified or any.
So if you are asking about the UX transition from the old one or new one,
Yeah.
it's a UI or UX user.
Oh, both essentially.
So basically the URL remains the same because the URL is of API gateway.
Right.
API gateway knows which resource or which UI is there.
Right. Right.
If there is some problem when it goes from a JSP server to Angular, there is a slowness or the page gets slowed again.
Right.
But that is how it is right now.
Okay.
But once you come to the Angular portrait UI, seamless. It is like a normal Angular.
Okay.
HTML modules and CSS.
Yeah, but
We have the same.
yeah, it's never quite that simple though.
So we have managed to replicate same UI on the
You have? Okay. Yeah, no, one of my other clients has it's sort of a similar thing. It's except that theirs is all software as a service space. I don't think they have on-prem, but they have it's a huge monolith, and it's all Java server faces. But then there's like 2 versions of Angular. I'm part of it. Angular JS, not new Angular, and then there's one whole feature that's built in Vue. And they've done a pretty good job of making it sort of look like it works together, but you can tell there's like some nuances, so that's why I was asking. So.
The UI was not jazzy enough.
Yes. Okay. All right. That's good. All right. Well, I think you've answered lots of questions. I actually have a question for you though. So you say you do mostly microservices now, right? You say you do mostly microservices now?
Yeah, microservices. So we are in our enterprise team where we basically provide CI/CD solutions to the entire enterprise.
So you're on the sort of DevOps side of things?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now we are basically migrating to DevOps. Previously, I was a Java developer.
Ah,
I've seen all this in my initial stage of the career when I was in PCS.
gotcha.
As soon as we basically migrated beyond DevOps and now we look at different solutions.
Okay.
So right now we are having one microservices application, but it is not written properly. It's whatever code that they can write there, just put it there. Somewhat clarity in the things. I was just basically thinking like this.
Right. Okay, cool. So since you do a lot of CI/CD, do you have a favorite built CI/CD platform?
Means we use multiple tools.
I know. I figured you use different ones, but do you have a favorite?
Means I would say Jenkins has always been the basic one,
Mm-hmm.
which every organization uses. But right now we are trying to migrate to GitHub Actions.
Mm-hmm.
In the middle there was the XLR as well. But XLR is more of the release transparency.
Okay.
So it helps us with the release process that it does not block any server. It is in Jenkins, it will basically hold any particular job or approval. It will basically hold it.
Right.
Whereas the XLR basically does a good job in the release management, not holding the queue, getting the approval separately.
Okay.
But now we are migrating to GitHub Actions, everyone. Then it basically helps out GitHub Actions is tightly coupled with the GitHub.
Right.
So the code resides there, the developer can directly build the code, deploy the code, left shift control, so they can find out about everything.
Right. Yeah, I like GitHub Actions a lot. I've been using Bitbucket pipelines a lot though because that's what I use internally, and then some of my clients have been using Bitbucket. So, but I still like Jenkins though. And the main reason is because I like the DSL. I really like writing in the Groovy DSL versus YAML. You know?
That's not like you can write either your own Jenkins file or it could be there, or you can write a commercial library.
Right.
You can write it the way you want all the jobs to work with the entire enterprise. No matter whether they are running Linux, Java, Python, no matter the technology.
Right.
And it basically works. And the best part is you make it configurable by just providing users the variables. They just update the configuration in the Jenkins file. Rest, whatever the workflow, the logic, everything is basically in the question library.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely like that better. But oh well, such is life.
Jenkins just have one flaw. It basically holds up for that particular region where the job is executed.
Yeah.
They are not coming out of it, and hence we are coming out of it.
Gotcha. Makes sense. All right. Well, and that topic, I guess you guys are done for the day. So, thanks for hanging out. I'm sorry it was low turnout, but it was nice to talk to you. So, all right. Thank you.